Hi. Alrighty. We're gonna get started soon. Gonna wait for Floyd to come in. Let the followers come on in. Happy Thursday. Come on in, come on in. Hey girl, hey. Gonna wait for Floyd to join. Y'all, I got a little nervous before this, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm excited. What's up, Jeremiah? Just waiting for Floyd. Tell your peoples we are here. Thank you for joining. Excuse any background and noise you hear. My kids are in school right now, so sign of the times. Hi everybody, welcome. Hey Journey of a Black Girl. Hey Courtney. Let me wave. Hi everyone, just waiting for Floyd to come on in. Well, the kids have been, I'm a mom. They have been told between this hour that they need to chill. So we'll see. Hello. Floyd is here. Hi, everybody. Hey, Ash. Are you requesting Floyd? Is it working? Hello, everyone. Come on in. We'll get started in a second. Yes, the life of a mom in live content. Background noise. But they have been threatened. Please don't call defects. Floyd, are you able to join? I see that you're here. This would be a cool conversation. I wish we could have recorded the conversation that we had yesterday to prep for this talk, because we just naturally have, the ATL vibe. So I'm looking forward to, we're giving you all the same vibe. Thanks, Shaniqua. Comes. Hey.
Hello. How's it going?
There we go. What's going on?
Another beautiful day in the neighborhood. So good to be in this conversation with you and everyone else who's watching us worldwide. How you doing?
I'm doing all right today. It's Thursday. It's almost the weekend. So here we go.
Yeah.
Right? How you feeling?
I'm
I've talked to
great.
you like every day this week.
Sometimes you have these weeks where you don't see someone for a while, and then you talk to them every day in some different capacity for like a week straight. So
Right. Just connecting, right?
It's a blessing.
And that's
it's a
right.
blessing.
And that's kind of what this conversation is about, is making those connections and how we manage them, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to give an introduction a little bit and start off with the conversation. My name is Lauren Jackson Harris. I'm the program coordinator for the AUC Art History and Curatory Studies Collective. Thank you, Cheryl, for this opportunity to bring in some Atlanta peeps to this conversation for the next month. I couldn't think of anybody else other than Floyd to speak with, because he is Atlanta. He is the connector. He is the viber, creating content consistently, creating events consistently. So he had to be my first choice. And Floyd, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Lauren, for the invitation. I'm Floyd Hall. I am an Atlanta native. I grew up in College Park, and I've been active in the Atlanta arts community for the past several years. And it's interesting to have this moment with you, Lauren, because as you mentioned earlier, we talk a lot about Atlanta and the arts often. But one of those things that we don't really get a chance to talk about is each other's like backstory and kind of how we got to where we got to. And so I think this moment is very interesting to be able to, press pause for a minute and really dive into some of those things. And I'm thankful just to be here and have some time with you and everyone else who's watching.
Right. And it's crazy because even all the conversations we've had, I didn't even realize your backstory. And like to do in these conversations is tell the story behind how you got to where you are. Like, what is your trajectory? What was your footing? What connections did you make? Because we want to share with the students ways that they could take their learning and immerse themselves in the art world. And I think yours is even more interesting because as a Morehouse man, you're an AUC alum in itself, Morehouse excellence indeed. But tell us a little bit about your story, where you started and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so grew up in College Park, as I mentioned earlier, and I went to Morehouse College. And I always tell people, my version of what a Morehouse man was different than I think what is the the branding of it, which is all great
Mm-hmm.
as well, like the MLKs and the Spike Lees. My Morehouse mentors were working class men who worked at the GM plant, who got up every day and fed their families and took care of their wives and their three daughters.
Right.
Like those were the salt of the earth men that I connected with, who my dad played poker with every Saturday. So like I think when I thought about Morehouse College and what it meant to me, it was the men in my community who were just solid men all the way around. And so I went to
Right.
Morehouse, majored in mathematics. And it's interesting because people think about mathematics as arithmetic or doing, finance, which is some of that too. But for me, mathematics is and always has been about
Yeah.
relationships. So when you think about equations
Mm-hmm.
and you think about abstract algebra, it's about how you're relating one thing to another and making those things fit together. Not so much about like
Right.
numbers per se, and that's how I always approached it. And so, fast forward, mathematics major, went to Georgia Tech as well, and then was beginning to find my way in the arts as just like a friend. I had friends who were doing cool stuff artistically,
Mm-hmm.
and was always a part of those sort of fly on the wall moments. But when I got to Georgia Tech, strangely enough, they had a cable network. So there was a Georgia Tech cable network, it's campus-wide cable
Okay.
network. So I started working there as a student producer. So I was producing video content. So I had my own TV show. I was writing it. I was doing the editing. I was doing the camera work. I was doing everything for it. And that was really just like,
That's the bug.
yeah,
That's where it
exactly.
started.
Yeah. That was the diversion from the
Mm-hmm.
hours upon hours I was spending in the mechanical engineering building, which was like great in its own way, but it was just heavy. It was very heavy.
Right.
Um, so I knew at some point that media was what I wanted to be involved in because I think I like the quick turnaround of media. And so ended up going to Columbia Business School with the focus in media and strategy. And that's both separately, but also together.
Yeah.
Understanding um, how organizations use media to achieve organizational objectives. That was really how I was thinking about how media was going to play a role in everything. Just like as we were stepping to this digital age now.
Right.
And so I went to Columbia. When I was coming back to Atlanta, I was looking for roles in media strategy, and it happened to be I was volunteering at a nonprofit organization called Wonder Root. The program manager at that time was a Spelman woman, Kwajalein Jackson. Many of you may know her. She's
AUC.
amazing.
Yeah.
But there was a space for me there. They didn't really have anyone managing their media, so I
Mm-hmm.
stepped in, kind of made my pitch, and began to like help shape more Wonder Root's like media, like public branding. So the redesigns, the podcast. They had a studio there. I knew how to edit, so I said, let's start a podcast. So we started the podcast. And so it was really more so me seeing opportunities and thinking like a startup
Yeah.
and
Taking
said, okay,
initiative,
yeah.
essentially.
And so pitching that, getting that approved, and then that kind of kickstarted my deep dive into the arts because then I began to interview everybody. So whether you were the intern at the front desk, whether you had a museum show at the High Museum,
Yeah.
or anything in between, people were
It kind
coming
of gave you
through.
that inroad.
Exactly, exactly. And so it really would help me to, like, that was my art education, really. At least in terms of a contemporary Atlanta
Yeah.
way, I began to know who was doing what and began to build relationships and do my research. And then it kind of grew from there.
And that's where it starts, because relationships, you talked about math in our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about math being those connections, making the relationships. And in
Yeah,
Atlanta, you know, there's this, that everybody knows everybody, right?
sure.
Like, but when you have these opportunities, when you're in this space, you really need to just take initiative and go out, because nothing's ever going to come to you. So you created this space for yourself at Wonder Root with the connection that you made. And you talked yesterday about another major connection that kind of were it kind of just was kismet in a way, with Arts ATL. You transitioned from media producing, taking initiative at Wonder Root, and somebody just from the relationship that you gained in those conversations, what happened next?
Yeah, so this whole notion of mathematics being about the relationships and about Atlanta, people in Atlanta, you know, always knowing everybody. The thing about Atlanta and knowing everyone is that everyone knows everyone, but you have to just figure out how. Like, how do I know
Yes.
you?
Yes.
Some point down the line, we have a connection. If you keep asking and keep, you know, figuring it out, at some point you realize this is how we're connected, and now
Right.
let's build something on top of that.
Right.
So it just so happened that I was producing a podcast at Wonder Root, and Laura Relye, who had not yet begun to take on the role of executive editor at Arts ATL, she was coming in as part of another creative group to do a podcast. And she now began to just talk about, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she said, hey, have you ever thought about writing? And at that point, I had not.
Yeah.
But the answer is always yes. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. Just like,
yeah,
yeah, of course,
yeah.
I can try that.
Whenever,
right. Never say
you
no.
know, and maybe some of that is just like, you know, some of that Morehouse confidence. Like, yeah, I can, like, if you give me a chance, I'll figure it out. Like, don't,
Exactly.
you know, don't think that I won't figure out a way to actually do it.
Right.
And so she said, yeah, well, let's talk about some ideas you have as far as writing. And so through Arts ATL, I began to pitch ideas that I felt were important. So writing about, you know, Janelle Monáe and Donald Glover, writing about Future. Like, I was so amped up to get the story about Future into Arts ATL, because in my mind, Future is contemporary Atlanta art. Yeah. Whatever you may think about subject matter, you know, he is significant in that way. And I was really amped up to try to get Future into Arts ATL, because I just felt like that would be me sort of getting, you know, my culture into this place where there really were not as many voices talking about that kind of thing. So one thing leads to another. I'm writing for Arts ATL. I'm still producing podcasts. And things begin to just bloom. And so as you begin to collect relationships and you begin to understand how you work and how other people work, other opportunities kind of come along. Fast forward, now I'm producing, you know, podcast projects like Bottom of the Map, which was with
great podcast, by the way. Y'all should check it out.
Thank you. And so over time, when you begin to think on your body of work, you realize that you're actually producing documents. Like, in my mind, I'm documenting my culture. This is what is important to me as a person. This has helped, you know, when I say this, I mean Atlanta culture has been my North Star in many ways. You know, growing up in Atlanta, you have a very distinct notion of how you perceive Black culture. And so as that being my default setting, whenever I would go travel the rest of the world, whether I'm in Brooklyn, whether I'm in London, you know, Atlanta culture is my default. And so wanting to see those stories documented and preserved, that becomes, I think, my default setting of how can I figure out a way to get what I'm passionate about and what drives me into this mainstream space, because it deserves to be there in my mind.
What's crazy is I was about to wear my old Atlanta shirt today, because I feel like essentially that's what you're preserving. Even though Atlanta is rapidly changing, gentrifying, it's morphing into this Hollywood setting. I think that the projects that you've worked on and the way you voice Atlanta, the way you bring Atlanta to the forefront, is old Atlanta, is classic Atlanta, where how I grew up, how you grew up, and you're kind of keeping it alive in a way. And it's that documentation and that archiving, which we spoke about yesterday, is important, especially during these times. But can you talk about the documentation part? Because to me, that is art history. That is art history. You're creating history right now, how you're documenting your stories and how you're putting them out there to the world. So can you talk about the documentation process and what it looks like to do the Born Digitals for archiving?
Sure. So a lot of it starts simply enough with love. And I say this not in any sort of like esoteric kind of way, but like I really love my culture. I
Yeah.
love what helped form me and how it helped, shape me as I move through the world. And so I think about these things that I love. I talked about the Morehouse men that were my mentors. These were just, solid men, but the culture that was fostered there, it's almost like if you can value the seemingly, average things or the mundane things and find the beauty in those things, then you help to understand how that gets you to the more flashy aspects of Atlanta, right? Because those flashier aspects of Atlanta don't exist without like the root of really what comes out of, Southwest Atlanta, the East Side,
Right.
All these, the West Side, all these other areas. And so for me, I'm always thinking about how can I infuse my culture into this project that I'm working on. And so I'm always thinking about, what will be important 10 years from now, from like an anthropology standpoint, like what would be necessary for people to understand who we were in this time frame? Because with the city changing from a built environment standpoint, you can't really stop that part. But the culture
Right.
part of it, that's the part that we have to preserve and try to capture and articulate for those who may be new to this space or those who may need to understand where something came from. So I'm always about research. I'm always about reaching back. I'm always about trying to talk to people. And I think through the podcasting part of it, I've always had chances to have different conversations with people.
Yeah.
And it helps me continue to refine my thinking around that.
Yeah.
Because
You're just taking it in essentially.
yeah. And I always like to talk to other Atlanta people because that's not like I think about my experience is my experience, but I need to go talk to Shaniqua Gay and say, hey, let's talk about your Atlanta experience, or how do you see this? Or my guy Brian Gaffney, who's in the chat, who's one of my mentors, also like let's talk about this, because for me it's always building upon these notions of the past as we move forward, so that we don't lose that. And I think the challenge going forward in thinking about born digital content, when you talk about what that means is so much of our archival process used to be pictures in grandma's photo album, where you could turn that over to Auburn Avenue Library and say, hey, here's a picture of my
physical,
grandma.
tangible that you can hand over. Yeah,
exactly. Like, here's a picture of my grandma with Maynard Jackson.
Right.
Here, like here's a picture of that. I think now the challenge is, because we have so many devices that we have, our phones, our cameras, that we collect, a new one every 2 or 3 years, and it's making sure that all of the valuable cultural artifacts that exist on those devices get mined and turned over and cataloged, so that we can continue to collect the culture. Otherwise, we'll be in this fragmented community of all of our memories being stashed on this phone or that phone or this hard drive or that hard drive. And I think we have to be more cognizant of realizing that there's value in that, and then how do we then turn that over into spaces where we want to collect it and curate that.
Right. Aside from the collecting, because we know our age, our generation, everything is on our phone, on our computers. We are capturing pictures, we're taking pictures, we're screenshotting, we're sharing, we're TikToking. There's a whole generation of us really using up the digital space. But I feel like that leaves out a generation, right?
Yeah.
In your experience with Legacy Makers and your project with the Idea Capital Grant, we spoke a little bit about ageism and racism in the tech world, and how people can be left out. Can you speak a little bit about your experience in trying to adjust, or at least touch the generation above us, baby boomers and above? How do you feel like that's affecting them?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been so wonderful about the Atlanta Legacy Makers Project is having the chance to really talk to that senior generation and make
Yeah.
sure that their story is engaged in the future story, because we are pretty much, I think we're always on a continuum.
Yeah.
We're of the now. Soon we'll pass it to someone else. It'll pass on to someone else. But I think from a design centered approach, so much of what we build, the larger we,
Mm,
is usually built for the folks who are designing it. So if you're a coder, if you're in technology, you're building things for you to use,
right.
and not often thinking about who else may need to use this. And I bring up the example of things like artificial intelligence
Hmm.
or facial recognition, where so much of that built environment was built by white men, or at least
Hmm.
non-black people. And so
Yeah.
when you're thinking about recognition and facial features, it oftentimes
Only recognizes
identifies people of
the
color.
white
Yeah,
skin.
because
Right.
folks are not involved in that design process. So I
Right.
think as we think about design and how we're designing conversations and how we're designing this archival process, is how do we make sure that the tools that we use are accessible to the older generation. So when I was
Right.
producing the last podcast, one, because of COVID-19, but then two, because of ease of access, I recorded almost all of those interviews over the phone. So I was able to, tell the elder or whoever I was talking
Answer your
with,
home phone. Right.
and answer your phone,
Yeah.
like this, like we're going to record this over the phone.
Right.
So I'm not having to have you, find your Zoom login or
Get
download
good
Zoom,
lighting.
or do you
Hold
have
the
the right,
camera.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you have the right, tech specs for it? I mean, I've had to walk my mom through several Zoom chats, so I understood the process of that. And no shade to my mom, love my mom,
Right.
but it's one of those things where you want to try to make it as easy as possible. So how do we design our systems and patterns in ways such that a range of folks can be involved and be involved in the process? And that's what I try to think about when it comes to keeping a wide range of people in the conversation.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about your two projects, the Legacy Makers and the Idea Capital Grant that you're working on?
Yeah, so the Atlanta Legacy Makers Project is an ongoing project that was started by City of Atlanta and Central Atlanta Progress. It initially started out as a way to community build around public art.
Mm.
So half a step back, um, there's a book entitled Where Peachtree Meets Sweet Auburn, um,
Yes.
which is a great book by Gary M. Pomerantz, which highlights Atlanta through the lens of two families, a white family and a black family, the families of Mayors Ivan Allen Jr. and Mayor Maynard Jackson.
Hmm.
So that book kind of hints at this intersection of Peachtree Street being the white kind of enclave and Auburn Avenue being the black enclave.
Right.
And so because we couldn't, there's probably going to be some larger things happening with those two mayors and their legacies in Atlanta going forward. Not to really spill those beans, but this project came out of that.
Okay.
This project came out of a way to honor their legacies and their shared legacies in impacting the city of Atlanta. So this podcast is capturing sort of what happens in the book as well as
Hmm.
those legacies.
Okay.
So
So are you talking to people who are still, I mean,
yeah,
obviously Maynard Jackson is with us, but his family members, his daughter?
yeah. So
Yeah.
in that book, I'm talking with the author. I'm
Okay.
talking with a range of cultural, colleagues who are in this current space, but also I did get a chance to get Bo Allen,
Hmm.
who is Ivan Allen's grandson. He's on the podcast, as well as Valerie Jackson, Maynard Jackson's widow.
Yeah.
So, legacy, right? Valerie Jackson is heavily involved in Maynard Jackson's legacy, from the naming
Right.
of the airport to a variety of other things where his name is prominently featured in Atlanta, legacy going forward. So, so having access to them to get their story, some of the off the record conversations with them was just so fruitful, because Valerie Jackson talks about, marrying Maynard Jackson and their marriage and their love affair, and like their
Mm.
just like passion, even to this day, where she goes and visits, his grave marker at Oakland Cemetery, and like just
Right.
really like involving that part of like that human part of legacy into that. So this is going to
Right.
be an ongoing project where we will continue to tell Atlanta stories as we look at those mayors and their legacies in the past, but also how do we go forward? Because
Right.
Atlanta is a very sometimes looking back kind of city. So we have to acknowledge that to begin with, but then how do we move forward from that
Right.
point and begin to tell other current Atlanta stories? Because
And so
this will
that's what the
continue.
Idea Capital Grant, I feel like, is doing for you. You're kind of
Yeah,
moving,
yeah,
you're kind of doing the historical with the present
yeah.
in a way.
The Idea Capital Grant is for a project called Cascade Road. And this is a project that's very near and dear to my heart because that's like, I think the epicenter of like Southwest Atlanta Black
Yeah.
culture, politically, artistically, economically. That's a space where I think Atlanta and Atlantans have always looked to for community.
Yeah.
And what that represents for me is a way to both look at the past, but then to pose some questions to figure out, well, what does Cascade Road mean now, given what it meant then? And then how do we reconcile that as we continue to move forward? So,
Right. Right.
like that's been a fun project to really like do some research for and think through. And I'm excited to share that when the time is right.
So with Atlanta, you're kind of doing the historical, the present. Where do you see Atlanta going? Because I know we speak very candidly about what we feel the issues are in Atlanta.
Sure, sure.
When it comes to access, when it comes to the segregated communities, in these conversations that you've had with a vast amount of people that live and work in the city, what transgressions are we facing? What issues are we facing as a Black culture and as art professionals? What do you feel in your gut is the issue in terms of the connectivity that we have and the building on our art community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to go back to this notion of like love again, not to be so like pie in the sky, but I think that when we love the things that got us here and we
Mm-hmm.
value those things and then we promote those things, we tend to have success. So I'll
Right.
say this in a very interesting way. The music side of things, Atlanta musically, right? 25 years ago was when Andre 3000 was at the Source Awards and he said, Atlanta got something to say,
That
right?
just made me feel old.
Right?
Yeah.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
But what that meant was, or what I think that represented was once Atlanta musically decided that we're going to focus on what we do best and what we
Mm-hmm.
are about, we'll find success and folks will connect with our story,
Right.
right? We're not trying to be New York anymore and LA anymore. Once we tap into what makes Atlanta Atlanta, and when we did that musically, we began to see this 20-year, 25-year run of Atlanta artists, being relevant because we
Right.
began to tap into what made us what we are. I think in the art side of it, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
If we trust who we are and love who we are enough to promote those things, then we will find the success that we are looking for, and we won't have to reach and follow the other trends of other cities. It'll be the Atlanta thing. And I think once that becomes what we focus on, then we'll
Yes.
get all the attention that we seek. But it's just
Yeah.
finding the will to trust that the things that you love are worthy and valuable enough to be lifted up. And
Yeah.
once we do that, it won't even matter about anything else.
That's a mic drop. That's a mic drop there. I guess one thing that I think bothers me in terms of just access for
Mm,
Atlanta, we talk about it often as leadership.
mm,
And do you see yourself in the future being a leader? I mean, you're kind of just this, guy that kind of moves to his own beat. You're making connections, you're flowing, you're producing, you're creating. Where do you see yourself in about 5 or 10 years as a leader in the arts community, in the media and technology community? And possibly, where do you even see Atlanta going? Where do you want to see Atlanta go in the next
yeah.
5 to 10 years?
I think, we have to always, be able to be honest with ourselves and like, what is it that we really want to, what is our purpose? What do we want to give to the world? What do we want
Right.
to, pull out of ourselves and kind of push forward? I think for me, what matters most to me is to try to connect and to center these different silos that we have. So I think that Atlanta is a very, old Atlanta versus new Atlanta, or transplant versus native kind of thing. I would love to see our policymakers, right, connect with the artists, the creatives who have helped to push the culture forward that they then benefit from. So
Yeah.
if I'm able to get into a space where I'm able to further connect the policymaker folks, from the mayor to city planning to all those things, because like I think having some sense of what Atlanta was and has been, and moving in some of those spaces, being able to connect that to the artistic folks and the creative folks who want to see a similar successful city, how can we,
Right.
push those things to, more, to, together to I think build upon what we have done up to, when it comes to this whole legacy thing.
Right.
So for me, I don't know what that looks like in terms of like a position, quote unquote,
Yeah.
like air quotes. But I think that's where I see my role in terms of wanting to understand policy and influence policy to make sure that the creatives who come
Right.
here are as vested in this city as we are, and the city is as invested in the creatives.
And it's already happening because there's a strong grassroots effort that's happening within especially the Black arts community. Even with Heather Infantry
Yeah,
staking her claim,
yeah,
leading that effort to making sure we get the funding that we deserve when we've been left behind. But now I think it's starting to really come together over the course of the last 10 years that I've come back to Atlanta and seeing it grow just from our own passion, which you speak of. We love what we do. And I think the Atlanta creative community is so interconnected that we are basically like holding hands with each other. Like, what we doing now? Where are we going now? What is happening? And and with those conversations that you're creating, I think that also helps put us out there into mainstream.
But on top of that though, like I think it's more than just thinking about being involved in connecting city and artists, like arts funding. It's about because like while we're all passionate about the arts, we all are residents and citizens. Like we all live here too. I want the artists to be just as invested in what's happening with the Department of Watershed Management, right? Like, let's talk about your water bills, right?
Matters.
Like, how are you paying attention to what's happening as far as like DOT and like SPLOST and like all these other things,
new development, real estate,
all of that? Because I think as a vested, citizen or resident, I think those are the things that further, root artists in the community. So it's not just about what am I getting as far as my art money, which is great, but are you invested, in what's going on with the school down the street? Like those are the things that I hope and wish to add more effort to, because I think that makes the interactions less transactional. It makes it less about, well, I got money for this thing, now I'm going to be involved. I don't want it to be so transactional. I want it to kind of come from a space of I'm invested in this community, and because I am, beyond like what I'm doing artistically or creatively, no, I want this school to be, high performing. I want these potholes.
How can I volunteer my time or my creativity to this space in your own community? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We have a question from Ashley, and she, I think she works for Invest Atlanta now, and she is asking, how can we keep our community informed with new developments within the city? I have an answer, but you go.
So I mean, I think one, it's being intentional, right? Yeah. So I think if you're at the, I mean, I don't know if Ashley is where she sits within these conversations, but I think that if you're thinking about policymakers who have the ear of developers or the ear of anyone who is spending money, right, in the city in any type of way, I think it's to be intentional to understand, like, the opportunities that exist now are because of the creative folks who have helped to usher in, the popularity of Atlanta and help make this place what it is. Like, this doesn't happen without a lot of people, really laying down some real groundwork. So I think it's being intentional to say, who all needs to be at the seat of the table? Who all needs to be at this table? And understanding that you have to do the work to include people who don't look like you, beyond just looks. I'm saying who all don't share your particular career aspirations. Like you have to kind of remove some of the perception that you may have about different pockets of Atlanta.
Right.
Understand that all those folks are necessary to make the city what it is. And how you go about involving them will help to inform that process. So I feel like you have to just be more intentional. I mean, we can strategize around like newsletters or
I mean, I think there definitely should be
billboards,
directed
whatever.
when it comes to developments. I think development could either be gentrification or development, right? It could, especially in the neighborhoods that are majority Black. And what I'm finding is that developers are moving into these spaces without even accessing the community that's already there. And right now I can't speak about the project, but there's a conversation that I'm seeing that I just got thrown into about a development that's happening in a Black neighborhood, and they want to create an arts community. And what's interesting is that, you know, as I tried to guide the conversation to support the Black arts community that exists where they are going to be, there was pushback, right? And it's just like, if you're going to go into this space, if you're going to come into this neighborhood, understand what you're entering. Half the time, the real estate developers, the companies, the property aren't from here. They're not here. But I feel like there should be a conduit between the city of Atlanta or Atlanta leaders and these developers that are buying the land and buying these spaces to advocate for the creative community or the community at large that exists already in that space. I think she's talking about accessibility. Like, how do we get the ear to the ground? How do we, like, if she knows about developers, maybe create a directory on Invest Atlanta's website where it says these developments are happening. Try to contact these developers if you want to get a space, get a residency. I feel like there's a lot of work we can do.
You know what though? You know, I think that there are a couple things on that. Whenever there is a development that happens in a neighborhood, they typically do have to go to the NPU.
Yes.
Go through the NPU process, right?
Yes.
So I think that I would like to maybe see some sort of policy happen at the NPU process, where as part of those checks and balances, where a developer gets the okay to do the development, like there needs to be, you know, a box that has to be checked in terms of, did you do this type of outreach? Did you include this type of, you know, like, what is your plan? Maybe even having it be part of the actual policy plan to say, as you submit your paperwork, what has been your plan in terms of community involvement, in terms of reaching out to the arts community? Because so many times a developer will look at the arts community as like this add-on thing at the end that you want to do after you've already.
The art is like a cushion,
sure,
right, for them moving in.
Yeah, it's like this like sort of end of the road thing that you want to talk about if you have budget left over, right?
Right.
And so I think if you move it further up into the actual process of saying, well, as part of this NPU process of getting signed off to do this development in this neighborhood, we would like you to have done a certain amount, you know, this is the criteria for engaging with the cultural community that is in this footprint, you know, show that you have actually done that, and, you know, get some sign-offs from the folks, you know, who are part of that process to actually verify that. Because I think that the NPU process is a very valuable process if more folks get involved in that. And also, you know, that's also a city of Atlanta that may not exist in other parts of the Metro Atlanta area. But I do think that with the NPU process, which I think Mayor Jackson instituted when he became mayor, you know, this is a thing that was, you know, part of his legacy, is making sure that both the artists are taking the initiative, but also the folks who are doing the development as well, to be involved in that process.
That's it. Goodness, I love this conversation. I could talk to you all day. When it comes to space in Atlanta, we're talking about developers, we're talking about space and representation. What do you see, right? I mean, it seems like you created a space for yourself at Wonderroot in terms of podcasting. There's an opportunity here. If you could today create a space or another type, I mean, it seems like you're already producing projects already that you're ideating, but if there was one thing that you could do in terms of creating a space, what would that space look like for you and what you want to bring to the Atlanta community?
A physical space, you mean? Or
a physical space. Or, I mean, it can be a physical space. It could be a media space. I mean, however you feel, what space needs to be created for Atlanta and what do you want to see happen with it?
Can we just have like a clubhouse? I would just love to have like a nice clubhouse.
Yeah.
where where we can just like hang out. I'm dead ass.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness though, real specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things that I've done this year that was not necessarily like, broadcast,
Yeah.
was when we did the Black Future Month celebration,
Oh, yeah.
where it was really like the last day of a Black History Month, and we got everybody together, as many folks as we could gather into a space where we could just like talk
Yep.
openly and have fun and like
Yeah.
be really transparent with one another.
Right.
When I say a clubhouse, what I really do mean is I would love to see a multimedia, multidisciplinary space for Black creatives, like intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
in a space that, that a space that provides space for people to actually
Right.
be,
Be
kind of take
themselves,
off.
be and celebrate
Yeah,
their culture,
yeah,
be
um,
comfortable.
yeah, because I think that's necessary. When I say like a clubhouse, I'm joking, but not really. Like I would
No,
love,
like
you know,
we talked about this before, so yes,
yeah,
that is,
yeah.
I am in agreement with you for sure.
Because I think that's something, as we all are moving in our own different ways. Um, Atlanta being a place where Black culture has helped shape a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to try to preserve what that feels like for people, what that has meant for a lot of people. And so I think that I want to do my part to try to preserve Black culture in that type of way, where creatives get a chance to come together and have a clubhouse.
You know
I'm
what's
serious.
interesting? I mean, that's kind of how Atlanta, when I heard, we had Atlanta Contemporary speak for one of our sessions for the early college program for the ACR Collective. And Veronica spoke about the history behind how Atlanta Contemporary was created.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, I'm like, I know enough people that are serious about building Atlanta as a creative economy, the arts economy here. And it could happen if we make it happen. So
Mm-hmm.
I see y'all are serious about creating this. Like, let's do it. I feel like, why not just do it? What
Yeah.
can we do to create it and just start? Because at the end of the day, if we just start, it will come.
It'll happen. It'll happen.
It'll happen.
I mean,
It'll happen.
like most things happen in Atlanta. If you start it with a serious level of like intention, normally people will hop in line and you have a parade going before you know
Yeah.
it. So
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Whew. Okay. So another part of thing that we wanted to talk about was civic engagement, which we kind of already touched on.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what the AUC Art Collective is creating at the AUC is kind of reviving the arts ecosystem just in the AUC itself. What do you advise these students to do to get involved in Atlanta as a city when they come here from their respective cities? If they're not from Atlanta, there maybe are majors and minors in art history and curatorial studies. What would you say? Hey, how can I get involved in the Atlanta arts community and advance my professionalism in my resume? What would you tell them?
I would say find a way to volunteer first. In like that, that's free. You can just start volunteering.
Yeah.
So again, shout out to Kwajalein Jackson, because she was the person that when I was volunteering at Wonder, she was program manager there, and I just really learned a lot from her in terms of how to how to give grace, how to just like move with some humanity and empathy through the arts community. I try to do that. She's amazing at that, and I try to live up to some of those things that we kind of work off each other from that time period. So one is volunteering, but then two, I would suggest Alma, which was Arts Leaders of Metro Atlanta. I paid my way through
with the Atlanta Regional Commission, just in case y'all are wondering.
Mm-hmm. Atlanta Regional Commission runs the Alma program. That program helped me establish one-on-one contacts with folks at different arts organizations around the city. So it's one thing to know, hey, I would love to do something with SCAD. Yeah. It's different to say, hey, I know someone who is there who I can call directly, and they'll answer my call. We can go have
because of the connections you made through through the organization.
Right. And so just being able to know, oh, that's the person behind Arts ATL, that's the person behind, you know, City of Decatur, that's the person who is, you know, behind the Alliance Theater. This is the person who is behind Seven Stages. Like you just sort of understand who's behind all of these different things. And then you begin to understand that there's only a handful of people at all of these, you know, different organizations. Like
Hmm.
every arts organization in Atlanta is like three people who
Yeah.
work there.
Right. Right.
And so once you know one of those three people,
You got everybody.
then you're good. Then you're good.
Right.
Because then
Right.
chances are, you know, there's someone else who works there who you didn't even know worked there, but you already know from like some other
Right.
place.
They probably heard
So
about your name through so and so because they're already in the same
exactly.
space.
So I would say start there. I would say Alma, Archdiocese of Metro Atlanta, volunteering,
Hmm.
um, and then I mean, since we're in COVID-19 world now, you can't really go out to certain things anymore. But those
True.
would be the places where I would start in understanding that this is an investment of time, but also an investment of, you know, some resources that is meant to be a return on that investment,
Right.
you know, down the line. Like this is for you to reap the rewards of that investment, and you should think of it in that way.
So how do you think, as Black creatives, how can we invest in ourselves, and how can we kind of, damn, I lost my question. But essentially, how can we kind of support ourselves in the creative economy that we're creating now? We had Heather to spearhead and get us all this money from the Community Foundation.
Sure.
So cheers to Heather. What can we do now? How do we think we can support each other? What ways do you feel that we can continue to prosper and grow?
Um, you know, I think that a lot of our growth in the past has come from collaboration and
Yeah.
willingness to work on behalf of yourself and others. And I think that a lot of what we built in the past, I mean, in the future, will continue to rely on some of that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't have a strong answer for you, but I will give you an answer to that I think is of importance. Black women have been the glue of the Atlanta arts community for some time.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it be from an official context or whether it be from relationships, nothing really moves unless Black women are supporting it. I'll give you an example. Versus
Yeah.
happened with Monica and Brandy, right?
Highest.
1.2 million people,
Yes.
1.2 million people
Yes.
watching Versus, right?
Yes.
Like, and people, you know, would have probably not even thought they would get half that, right? But you don't really understand the community building that comes when Black women are doing well. And
Yes.
so I think in the arts community,
Mm.
if Black women are doing well, then the rest of us will be fine as well.
Mm.
Um, and so I just want to like reiterate that, like, and I don't have any answers, like, you know, I
Yeah.
don't have concrete answers, but I just
No, I
know
mean
that
that
like what I
answers
know.
it. That
Yeah, yeah.
answers it. So who do you think in Atlanta are the Black women that are leading? Who are the or spearheading? Not even leading, just of whether officially or unofficially. Are those who are those individuals that are really leading the art, media, and technology space as Black women in Atlanta?
I
Do you
mean,
think you name them
I
off the top
think
of your head? No.
so. It's funny that you mentioned that because I'm about to plug myself and some other things. So
It's good.
I'm actually editing a series of articles for Arts ATL
Hmm.
that will be publishing in September. And I
That
haven't really
features
talked about
us.
it publicly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like every article that I'm editing, every article that I assigned was assigned the topic is about Black women and the writer is a Black woman.
Yes.
Um, and I did that because I just felt like that feels like the future for me. Is if
Yeah.
the women are cool, then everything else will take care of itself. So,
Yeah.
so Brittany Bosco, in
Yeah.
terms of like art and music and design, Brittany Bosco, I know she's between
She's
Atlanta and
yeah.
LA and New York, but like she has roots here.
Yeah.
I think she is important to how that is gonna function in the future. I think Danielle Deadweiler
Hmm.
is important as a multidisciplinary artist who continues to do both, you know, acting as well as, you know, performance artwork. I think she is just an amazing thinker about the work
Right.
and the arts, and she's from Atlanta, so I'm always going to give her, you know, her props. So I think
Okay.
Danielle Deadweiler is one. I think with in the academic space. I think Spelman College and the AUC Art Collective, I think in terms of trying to seed the next generation of curators who will be the people who are going to be in positions to dictate and assign all, the work. Like, you got to have the curators in spaces to, be thoughtful about all this stuff, right? So I think you all are doing amazing things. And then Shaniqua Gay, who I think as a fine
Queen
artist,
Mother.
as a fine artist, I think I think that she is, she's hot right now, and she's been hot, right? But I just think that when I think about the future of the different types of artists that will be important to the city, I think Danielle, Shaniqua, AUC Arts Collective, and Brittany Abasco are folks who I just feel like are going to be the nexus of a lot of different things happening moving forward.
Wow. That, Shaniqua, you hear that? You doing it, girl. I guess for the AUC Art Collective, in terms of curators and the individuals that we're building to transform the art space. In Atlanta, we only have essentially, the high. I feel like we're a little limited in that area. What type, if you could bring a major museum here and make it something, what would that look like?
See, I struggle with that particular question because while I do understand that we only have a handful of everything, like we have like one of everything, right? We have like one major thing of everything, right?
Right.
But I think when it comes to sort of importing other things here, I struggle with that because I sometimes wrestle with the fact of I like for things to come of a place, not think about what can we bring here. But if there was one experience that I thought could work or would be valuable here, is MoMA in New York acquired the outpost PS1. So MoMA PS1 is this outpost of MoMA's program where they do a lot more experimental work.
Right.
They have more programming that is more, it rotates more, but also they have a summer series. They used to have a summer series called The Warm Up, where through maybe like 8 weekends in the summer, they would have visual artists, music artists, DJs, everyone kind of like performing in this outdoor party space. It really felt like it was a nexus of like culture. And so I remember going there, and this is when I knew it was really popping, 2 years ago. For the warm up, they had all this quote unquote like high fine art or whatever. But for the music guests in that day, they had Southside, who was a producer in Atlanta. Southside, I don't know if y'all really know Southside. It's the trap music artist. Y'all know Southside, right? But like Southside brought out Trouble, who was another Atlanta artist. And these are like Atlanta artists. Like Trouble is like East Side. Like, look up who Trouble is. I'm not going into his discography, but like,
can't say.
But like, they're highlighting these like Atlanta people at PS1 in this sort of like fine art space. And I just thought like, this is what we could be doing. The second year I went, they had Fat Man Key, also Atlanta folk. Again, like I'm seeing these Atlanta people get love elsewhere. Elsewhere, right? And so one of those, so I think about the resources that it takes to like for the MoMA to allocate to do PS1. And I'm like, we could have that. We could have that. I think also one of the things that I want to stress about that is that PS1 is a long way from where MoMA is like geographically in New York.
Right.
And one of the things I think is important about what happens in art in Atlanta is that I would love for it to be decentralized from downtown Atlanta. So much of what we do, we feel like we have to do it downtown.
Come to the city.
It's got to be downtown. But 90% of Atlanta's population, Metro Atlanta, that is, lives outside of downtown Atlanta. Like 90% of the population lives outside of the city of Atlanta. So if we're talking about 90% of your audience living some other place beyond downtown, why don't we continue to put things downtown? like that's been a personal sort of like pet peeve of mine, is that can we curate events? Can we put institutions? Can we bring these movements and these experiences to the places where people actually live slash already have culture,
Right.
right?
And that's a
You
part of the
know,
segregation and siloism that we create in ourselves, because there's communities that create things, but there's no connection to the downtown. It's like, oh,
yeah.
you have this over here, you're creating this over here, and it's like, but downtown is the epicenter for some reason.
But and that's the thing is, like, I get that it feels like it has to be that, but I don't think it does. I mean, culture,
Yeah.
like people will find the culture. You know, when and I'm
Yeah.
when when they do what is it? East Atlanta Day every year. East Atlanta Day on the east side, and everyone shows up. You know, from Zone 6 to further east to Lithonia, people come out. You
Yeah.
have all of the east side
Yeah.
showing up. All the rappers come out. Everyone pulls up because that's where the culture is. If you're talking about
Right.
Southwest Atlanta, right, where so much of the culture has emanated from, let's support things where the culture came from. We don't always have to
Mm.
travel to downtown to do it, because then you're trying to relocate something that already has a home, you know, where it has been. So I'm just one of those, I want to see expansion, but not expansion the same way that we've already had it, because what does that really achieve?
So
You know,
expansion, but not exclusion in a way. Like you
yeah,
don't
exactly.
want. Yeah. 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 Whew. So I don't see any more questions. Do anybody have any questions? Like, feel free to ask. We have like 4 more minutes. I feel like Floyd and I have had such a robust conversation, and
We
we
could
could
do this
talk
all day.
forever. All Literally, Atlanta all day for
We could do
sure.
this all day.
Does
Yeah.
anybody does anybody have any questions, or do you want to speak about anything that you have coming up, or is there something that we've missed that you want to share with anyone and in the community?
I'm just thankful for everybody and their support up to this moment, and even going forward. I mentioned the Arts ATL pieces; those will be out in September. Um, the Atlanta Legacy Makers Project, that podcast
Mm-hmm.
will continue throughout the rest of the fall. Cascade Road as well. Um, my website, floydcreates.com. You can visit that for any other additional like information or whatever the case may be. I am a co-founder in a local journalism platform called Canopy Atlanta. So that's
Mm-hmm.
another venture where we are trying to tell Atlanta stories through journalism and amplify the next generation of Atlanta journalists. So it's going to be a quarterly
Wow.
publication. A quarterly, but also every issue focuses on one neighborhood at a time. So
Okay.
the first neighborhood that we're going to be focusing on is West End.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the first neighborhood that we do for Canopy Atlanta. Some amazing West End stories that will come out of that. That's going to happen at the end of this month, early October. So look for that. But every quarter there'll be a different story or a different issue that focuses on a different Atlanta neighborhood. So Canopy Atlanta is that handle as well. So that's about it.
So we do have one question that just popped in. It
Okay.
says, how do we leverage neighborhood creative groups in that decentralization?
How do we leverage? I think.
How do you leverage neighborhood creative groups? Sorry. How do you leverage neighborhood creative groups in that decentralization?
So you know what it is? I think for me is I feel like this is my city. So and I say
Yes.
that with all like confidence, is that I feel confident to go in any neighborhood in this city. I feel like I'm good in any neighborhood. If I'm on the east side, if I'm on Southwest Atlanta, if I'm in Buckhead, if I'm on Bankhead, I feel like I'm good anywhere in this
That's
city.
real love. Yeah,
And
that's real love.
so because I feel that way, I feel like whenever I go into a space on any side of the city, I'm going to try to I'm going to respect that side of town, number one, but also, hey, what are y'all doing? This is what I'm doing. How can we collaborate? How can we work? But also, like, I don't want to take away from what y'all are doing. I want to value that. So
Yeah.
I try to, I try to move like this is my city, and so it's not even like leveraging anything like structurally. It's just saying like I love this city so much that when I pull up on the east side, I'm trying to show love and give love. And so if it's reciprocated, then we can work, and the same thing on the west side. You check in with people when you you know, in their neighborhoods or whatever the case may be. Like, you just show respect the same way
Right.
that you go into someone's neighborhood or someone's house, right?
Right.
You know, you try to show that
That's
same love and get that same respect. So
forever. I love
that's
it.
how
Right.
you know I
Right,
move.
Courtney. Right. I
So
think
what?
that's a great way to end. Like Courtney said, forever I love Atlanta. Like that's essentially it. Showing love to the city of Atlanta. Thank you, Floyd, for coming. Stay tuned for next week for our